Do you ever struggle with your prayer life, wondering what to pray or how to truly connect with God day to day? Introducing the Grace Daily Devotions app, your journey to deeper faith and personalized spiritual growth. Grace delivers daily devotions and prayers crafted just for you, based on what your heart and soul needs most. Experience devotional time and prayer like never before. Daily devotions made easy. No more searching, no more guessing, just grace, guidance, and growth at your fingertips using the latest technology. Download the Grace Daily Devotions app by going to graceapp.io. That's graceapp.io. Let grace inspire your prayer life. Start your journey now.
Welcome back to the History of the Papacy podcast, a podcast about the popes of Rome and Christian Church. Prepare yourself to step behind the ropes and leave the official tour of the story of the popes and Christianity. I am your host, Steve Guerra, and I thank you for joining me on this journey. In this series, we are tracing the growth and development of the Catholic Church in the United States from the 18th to the mid-19th century. In this installment, we will move to the heart of Europe to show what was going on in parallel to the situation in the United States. This was a time where the papacy itself was in crisis. The late 18th and 19th centuries brought war, revolution, and ideological upheaval that shook the very foundation of the Catholic Church. We will follow the collapse of traditional alliances, the papacy's darkest days, and its unexpected revival as a global spiritual authority. This episode is largely drawn from a series that we did called The End of an Era, which focused on the papacy during almost the exact same time period as our current series. Definitely check out those episodes if you want a really comprehensive look at the papacy during this time of incredible change. We got to start off with the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment questioned traditional authority in science, politics, and religion. Its intellectual foundation challenged the Catholic Church teaching on reason, authority, and the nature of man. The Catholic Church, obviously long a dominant force in Europe in politics and culture, faced a growing backlash from secular thinkers who believed in individual rights, democratic governance, and scientific progress. In France, these ideas became fuel for revolution. Beginning in 1789, the French Revolution dismantled centuries of royal and ecclesiastical power. The civil constitution of the clergy in 1790 required clergy to swear allegiance to the state, placing church operations under governmental control. This divided French Catholics as many priests refused the oath and were labeled as counter-revolutionaries. Churches were desecrated and the cult of reason briefly replaced Christianity as the state religion. The Reign of Terror targeted clergy and devout lay people alike. And what we will see in upcoming episodes in this series is that the loss for French Catholics as far as clergy goes was actually a gain for the American Catholic Church, because clergy members left revolutionary France to join revolutionary America, which is kind of strange, but we'll get into a lot of why that worked. Pope Pius VI condemned the revolution's anti-clericalism, leading to direct confrontation with revolutionary France. French forces invaded the Papal States in 1798, arrested the Pope, and proclaimed a Roman Republic. Pius VI died in captivity in Valence, France. The papacy, long seen as an enduring institution, seemed vulnerable, even obsolete. This could really have been the end of the papacy if things had played out just a little bit differently. differently. Pope Pius VII was elected in 1800s under really precarious circumstances. He entered into the Concordat of 1801 with Napoleon Bonaparte, seeking to restore the church in France. The agreement allowed public worship and returned some property, but placed the church firmly under Napoleon's control. Napoleon's later coronation in 1804, where he famously crowned himself in the presence of the Pope, symbolizing the shifting power dynamics that go all the way back to Charlemagne. And this cut out the heart of the relationship between the French kings and the papacy that went back 1,000 years to Charlemagne, at least, and arguably to Clovis. Pius VII's later imprisonment by Napoleon really underscored the Pope's political impotence. The Papal States were absorbed into Napoleon's empire, yet the Pope's dignified resistance earned him some respect. Whenever Napoleon fell, Pius returned to Rome, a religious figure who had endured political storms with steadfast spiritual strength, and he got through this persecution and really solidified something for the church. The post-Napoleonic settlement at the Congress of Vienna in 1815 sought to restore Europe's monarchies and traditional structures, including the Papal States. Yet in the 19th century, it would be marked by repeated clashes between old regimes and new ideologies. Liberalism, nationalism, industrial capitalism were all reshaping societies. Pope Gregory XVI, who was pope from 1831 to 1846, symbolizes the papacy's response. In a word, resistance. His encyclical Mirari Vos condemned religious indifferentism and freedom of the press. He opposed railroads and the Papal States as symbols of dangerous modernity. The church feared that liberal revolutions would lead to secular states that marginalized religion entirely. And that's another thing we'll investigate in the series as we progress. Did that happen in what would essentially be a secular state of the United States? Did that really decrease the dynamism of the American Catholic Church? That's something we'll have to look at. Was Gregory correct? Hey, Steve here. If you're enjoying the History of the Papacy podcast, consider joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/History of the Papacy. We're working toward going completely listener funded, which means no more ads ever. When you join, you get early access to episodes, monthly book giveaways, and most importantly, your name is added to the History of the Papacy diptychs, our own list of commemorated supporters. You can become an Antioch level supporter for just $3 per month. But it makes a huge difference to making the History of the Papacy ad-free and independent. Nobody likes ads, not you, not me, and I'm the guy who records them. So let's just get rid of them. Visit patreon.com/History of the Papacy and join today.
Hi, everyone. Super Bowl champ Vernon Davis here from Legal Help Center. If you've been injured in an accident and think you deserve compensation, listen up, because we have legal professionals standing by right now to answer your questions for free. You can find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth.
Thanks, Vernon. You heard it, folks. If you've been injured, call and find out how much you qualify for. Call 800-497-4410. Advertisement sponsored by Legal Help Center. May not be available in all states.
No order better represents the dramatic shift of 19th century Catholicism than the Society of Jesus. Suppressed in 1773 by Pope Clement XIV under political pressure from European monarchs, the Jesuits were seen as too powerful, too independent, and too deeply involved in politics. Their absence left a vacuum in education, diplomacy, and missionary work. Their restoration in 1814 by Pius VII came at a moment when the church was in desperate need of intellectual and pastoral leadership. The Jesuits resumed their traditional roles as teachers, confessors, and missionaries, as well as defenders of the faith. They established or revived educational institutions all around the world, from Europe to the Americas to Asia. The Jesuits would be the forward face of Catholicism in British American colonies and in the nascent United States. In many ways, two very non-Catholic countries, the almost completely Protestant United States and the Orthodox Christian land of Russia, kept the Jesuit learning kindled to be relit with their establishment in 1814. In the face of liberal ideologies and Protestant expansion, the Jesuits positioned themselves as guardians of Catholic orthodoxy. And speaking of orthodoxy, it's kind of weird why Catherine the Great in Russia would keep the Jesuits alive, because in a lot of ways the Jesuits would be in conflict with the Orthodox in later times, and it was really amounted to a troll of the Catholic Church, of what we would say in the modern parlance. And that was really the reason. And the Jesuits were in these two lands for very different reasons. In America, because one of the leading clergy members that we talked about, John Carroll, was a Jesuit, and he wanted to keep them going, and he could keep them going. These two polar opposites geographically and ideologically were able to keep the Jesuits alive, in which they exploded out after they were reinstated. Yet, despite all of that, the Jesuits remained controversial in Protestant majority countries like England and the United States, as well as in revolutionary leaning states in Europe and Latin America. Jesuits were often accused of secret political agendas. Their loyalty to the papacy, international connections, and reputation for academic rigor made them targets of suspicion. Anti-Jesuit sentiment often overlapped with broader anti-Catholic and anti-clerical movements. Despite all this, the Jesuits' influence grew. Their commitment to education and intellectual life made them central to the Church's strategy of internal renewal and global outreach. Jesuit colleges and seminaries trained new generations of clergy and lay leadership. Their work helped shape the modern identity of Catholicism in a world that was increasingly pluralistic and ideologically divided. The Jesuits would be viewed with a similar level of suspicion as a group we're going to talk about in a moment, the Freemasons. But let's talk a little bit about something called the Revolutions of 1848. They erupted across Europe and tested every monarchy and traditional institution. In the Papal States, Pope Pius IX, who had been seen as a liberal reformer, was caught in the turmoil. After granting a constitution and amnesty to political prisoners, he faced mounting demands. When his prime minister was assassinated, Pius fled Rome. A republic was declared, and radical leaders such as Giuseppe Mazzini took control. Pius returned in 1850 with French military support, but his outlook had hardened. Disillusioned with liberalism, he rescinded reforms and reaffirmed traditional church authority. His experience mirrored that of many conservatives who initially welcomed change, but then recoiled at its consequences. The revolutions of 1848 would impact the United States in many important ways. The papacy's loss of temporal power accelerated its spiritual centralization. Pope Pius IX embraced an ideology or a theology of ultramontanism, literally beyond the mountains, a reference to Rome's authority over national churches, in contrast to Gallicanism and other ideas which favored local ecclesiastical autonomy. Ultramontanism asserted the Pope's supreme authority in doctrinal matters. Ideas like Gallicanism, you could almost, but not quite compare them to the way Eastern Orthodoxy works, where individual, usually national churches they're called self-heading or autonomous. They're autonomous in a way that they more or less can, with almost all matters, control it themselves, but they're also in communion with other national churches. That's kind of what this Gallicanism was looking at. But the shift to Ultramontanism was a tidal wave. This all culminated in a work called the Syllabus of Errors in 1864, which was an annex to the encyclical Quanta Cura. The syllabus condemned 80 propositions considered incompatible with Catholic Church doctrine, such as socialism, modernism, and the idea that the Pope should reconcile with liberal civilization. It rejected the notion that the state should be neutral in matters of religion and that there should be a separation of church and state. These documents provoked fierce debates. Liberals sought a repudiation of Enlightenment values. Some Catholics, especially in countries with constitutional governments, worried it might alienate both moderate and modern believers. Yet, for many, the syllabus was a rallying cry, a declaration that the Church would not yield to the spirit of the age. The First Vatican Council, which was from 1869 to 1870, followed on this wave. Its defining achievement was the dogma of papal infallibility. So when the Pope is speaking ex cathedra on faith and morals, the Pope cannot make an error. This was a spiritual doctrine with immense symbolic weight. Even as Italy seized Rome in 1870 and ended the Papal States, Pope Pius IX emerged as a figure of transcendent authority. And in many ways, Vatican I is probably the most transformative moment in Catholic Church history. It totally changed the way the church operated and its outlook going forward. I think a study of Vatican I will, if you're interested at all in Catholic Church history, is an absolute must. And there's many good books. If you want to learn more about different books you can read, just reach out to me and I will definitely give you some resources, or listen to our previous series, which would definitely fill you in and is very in depth, or you can, the resources are mentioned in there as well. Now, deprived of its actual secular authority and of the Papal States, just down to the city-state of which was essentially a neighborhood, the Vatican neighborhood of Rome, the papacy turned its focus outward. Catholicism was spreading rapidly in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Missionary activity increased, often aligned with European imperial expansion. Religious orders, especially the Jesuits and the Franciscans, established schools, seminaries, and hospitals. This global growth helped transform the papacy from a European monarchy into a universal spiritual leader. Now let's talk a little bit about Freemasonry, because Freemasonry is definitely a topic that has come up in the podcast series already, in this current series, and will come up again. So Freemasonry in the 18th and the 19th century became a lightning rod in the cultural, political, and religious battles that defined modern Europe. While its early development was often benign or even cooperative with religion, in some places, priests were Masons, high-level bishops were Masons. Freemasonry increasingly clashed with the Catholic Church, though, especially in Southern Europe. Masonic lodges promoted Enlightenment ideals such as liberty, secular education, civil marriage, and cremation, often putting them in direct conflict with Catholic Church doctrines and dogmas. This led to what historian John Dickey described as a culture war in countries like Italy, France, and Spain, where Freemasons frequently backed liberal national movements and anti-clerical policies. At the same moment, the church accused Masons of undermining Christian civilization, going so far as to attribute modern upheaval to Masonic conspiracies, particularly through Jesuit-run publications like La Civiltà Cattolica. Freemasonry's structure and secrecy only deepened suspicions. With multiple rites like the elaborate Scottish rite, popular in America and founded in France, Masonry spread internationally while maintaining complex rituals and these quote-unquote weird degrees of initiation. The lodges offered both spiritual camaraderie and political and business networking, becoming key institutions for nationalist and liberal leaders. In post-unification Italy, for example, Freemasonry became closely tied to the new secular state, with many government officials, especially ministers of education, drawn from Masonic ranks. Although not all Masons opposed the church, and many Masons were in the church, there was a perceived alignment of Freemasonry with revolutionary and anti-clerical movements, and this led the church to see it as one of the most dangerous ideological threats of the era. Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors.
Do you ever struggle with your prayer life? Maybe you wonder what to pray or how to deepen your connection with God. You're not alone. The Grace Daily Devotions app understands your struggles. Grace is not your typical devotional and prayer app. It's personalized. Each day you receive devotions and prayers tailored to your unique spiritual needs. Whether you're seeking hope, comfort, guidance, peace, or forgiveness, Grace meets you where you are and helps you grow, one day and one prayer at a time. Imagine waking up to a devotion and prayer that speaks directly to what's on your heart that day. No more scrolling or guessing, just thoughtful, meaningful encouragement right at your fingertips. Ready to experience devotion like never before? Download the Grace Daily Devotions app now. Go to graceapp.io. That's graceapp.io. Discover devotion on your terms. Strengthen your prayer life. Find grace every day.
Freemasonry and the Catholic Church clashed tremendously in Europe, and in particular with the Risorgimento Italy. You can see why they clashed. To the Freemasons, the Catholic Church was a dinosaur. The Catholic Church at the time was huge. Many people followed what the church said almost without question, and the church was seen as a vestige of the Dark Ages and wanted to bring society back to a primitive time. To the Catholic Church, the Freemasons were the ultimate modernists with all their Enlightenment foolishness. Freemasonry's ideals did not line up with Catholic ideals, but they could work with a certain Protestant worldview. As we've seen in this series so far, Catholics were a tiny portion of the population of the American colonies and early American Republic in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. There were very few Catholic leaders of the revolutionary generation or founding fathers. Of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, there was only one Catholic signer, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. There were 9 Freemasons, including the big names like John Hancock and Benjamin Franklin. When the United States Constitution was signed a decade later, there were 2 Catholic signers, including another of the Carroll clan, Daniel Carroll. There were 9 Freemason signers, including heavy hitters like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin again, and Daniel Carroll, double dipping as both a Catholic and a Freemason. Daniel Carroll, being both a Catholic and a Freemason, prefigures some of the conflicts that will come about from people being members of these secret societies as well as practicing Catholics. Later popes will definitively call out that being a Freemason or a member of any secret society and being a Catholic would be antithetical. The ideals of the Masons lined up well with Enlightenment views of many of the founding fathers, so you can see why many would be drawn towards the secret society. And the whole Masonry was a social club as well. The rich and powerful in your town or city would be members of the local lodge. What's a better way to network than to be in a club with the business and thought leaders of your area? The local network also would connect you into a much broader network. There were 16 presidents of the United States during the period of time we are observing in this series. Either 6 or 7 of them were Masons. There is some question to whether Thomas Jefferson was officially one, but either way, that is 40% of the presidents were in the club. The prominence and power of the Masons brought a backlash in the United States. In the early 1800s, anti-Mason political parties arose in the United States. This is also the point in Europe where the Catholic Church started a hard press against the Masons. Masonry's popularity rose and fell over the years, but it was always around. The Catholic Church's numbers would rise tremendously in the decades after the Revolution, but despite that increase, there's only been 2 Catholic U.S. presidents, both of them well after the time period we'll talk about in this series, John F. Kennedy in the 1960s, and then Joe Biden in the 2020s. Yet there have been at least 15 Masonic presidents, demonstrating the Masons are still a potent force in U.S. politics and power. Moving on, the church also emphasized education. Catholic universities, seminaries, and primary schools expanded. These institutions trained a new generation of priests and lay leaders committed to intellectual rigor and pastoral care, along with building up the church. The Jesuits in particular became synonymous with high-quality education, both in Europe, America, and beyond. Doctrinally, the church reaffirmed traditional teachings on marriage, the sacraments, and the authority of the magisterium. It resisted modernist interpretations of scripture and theology, leading to tensions with scholars and reform-minded clergy. These conflicts would intensify in the 20th century, but their roots lay in this period of consolidation. The conflict in education between progressive-minded Protestants who would establish free public school systems and eventually mandatory public schooling, and the Catholic Church built. These progressive Protestant crusaders may not have been as progressive as they imagined themselves, being that one of the primary reasons they established public schooling and later mandatory schooling was to suppress Catholic teachings. So Catholics strove to maintain their identity. They began doing this in the period we're observing in the early 19th to mid-19th century, and after that, they began to build strong networks of parochial Catholic grammar and high schools. The 19th century was really a crucible for the Catholic Church, from near annihilation during the French Revolution to the proclamation of papal infallibility. The Church transformed itself. It abandoned dreams of political restoration and instead asserted spiritual sovereignty. The Pope was no longer a European prince, a medieval character, but the shepherd of a global flock moving into what we would envision a Pope today. This pivot allowed the Church to survive and eventually thrive into modernity. Think about that. A church that was almost dead in the 1700s, early 1800s, explodes, completely changes its mission, you might say, its vision statement, and becomes an absolute global power without a state within 200 years. And the church did this not by capitulating to secular trends, but by clearly defining its beliefs, consolidating its institution, and engaging the world with a distinct moral voice. So in the next episodes, we'll return to the United States, where waves of Catholic immigrants were reshaping the church in a democratic republic. How did American Catholics balance faith, identity, and loyalty to their new country, which was built on an ideal of separation of church and state and the freedom of religion, but often had a very difficult time living up to those ideals? That's what we'll tackle as we move forward.
The Historical Jesus Podcast is the sweeping saga of the life and times of Galilean Jesus of Nazareth, as well as the faith, religion, and church founded to honor and disseminate his acts and teachings. Join me, Mark Vinette, on this fascinating journey through time, exploring the many great works of Christian theology, literature, architecture, music, and art inspired by the words and deeds of Jesus Christ.